We are told that Rome fell, that one day it was an empire, and the next a ruin. A line in a history book, a clean break, a fall from greatness. 476 AD, the official death. The last Western emperor deposed, the legions gone, the glory shattered. But the truth is slower and deeper and more unsettling. Because Rome didn't fall. It changed state. It dispersed. It went underground. And in doing so, it became something far more permanent. The fall of Rome is one of the most enduring myths of civilization, not because it happened, but because we need to believe it happened. We need the idea of collapse, of consequence, of the mighty being brought low. But the world after Rome was not a world without it. It was a world formed by it. Think of an empire not as a flag or a border, but as a code. A script that writes systems, a logic that replicates itself through space and time. Once that code is released, you cannot kill it by toppling a statue or burning a palace. The code continues. Sometimes silently, sometimes invisibly, but always present. So when Rome fell, what truly changed? Did the roads vanish? Did the aqueducts dry up? Did the cities disappear? Number. In many places, life went on with Roman titles, Roman taxes, Roman law. A new ruler, perhaps, but the throne remained Roman in shape. You walk down the street in Paris, you walk through London, Vienna, Milan, and beneath your feet are Roman stones. The roads you travel, paved by Roman hands. The cities you enter, laid out by Roman plans. The laws that govern your land, descendants of Roman logic. And look at your world now. The republics, the senates, the concepts of citizenship, of written law, of empire itself. These are not relics. They are continuities. Rome is not gone. It has simply moved into courthouses, into cathedrals, into constitutions, into language. It has migrated. It has infected. It has taken root. Not in land, but in thought. Because Rome was never just a place. It was a format. A framework for how humans organize power, time, space, and belief. And once that format is established, you cannot delete it. You only run it under new skins. So what truly fell in 476? A boy emperor, a city already emptied, a formal title. But in Constantinople, Rome lived on. In the church it transformed, in the law it calcified. In the West it became memory, then dream, then blueprint. And perhaps that's what Rome always was. Not a place, but an archetype. Not a body, but a ghost. One that refuses to pass, because it doesn't have to. It simply waits, and reawakens, and reorganizes, again and again. When modern powers rise, they take Roman names, Roman banners, Roman architecture. They build domes, arches, columns, not because of fashion, but because of inheritance. They revive Latin phrases. They crown emperors. They salute like legions. They hold senates. They march under eagles. Rome is not remembered. It is replicated. Even its collapse is taught as a warning, but the real lesson is elsewhere. Rome shows us that no empire truly dies. It dissolves. It adapts. It waits. Like a program running in the background, updating itself, changing costume, rewriting syntax. So next time you hear that Rome fell, ask instead, Where did it go? And look around you. The signs are still here. The stone, the law, the structure, the story. You were not born in a post-Roman world. You were born inside the long echo of an empire that refused to end. Because Rome never fell. You walk through a modern city. You see the cars, the glass towers, the lights. But look closer, beneath the pavement, between the angles, behind the names. There is another city, quiet and unseen, not a ruin, but a shadow. And that shadow is Rome. Rome is still here, not in its monuments, but in the shape of space. In the way we organize roads, in the way we raise public buildings, in the symmetry of cities, in the silence between stones. The Roman city was not random, it was a ritual. Every new Roman town followed the same blueprint. A forum at the center, a grid of roads branching outward, temples aligned to the cardinal points, walls enclosing a sacred geometry. It was not urban planning, it was a cosmic mirror, a way to imprint order onto chaos, to map heaven onto earth. And that logic persists. Look at Washington, D.C., wide avenues cutting perfect axes, Capitoline domes, Senate chambers, columns, obelisks. The entire city, a love letter to something that fell long ago. Paris, London, Madrid, Berlin, even cities built in the New World carry this echo. The layout, the public spaces, the naming. Rome is the ghost code underneath modern civilization. Walk into a courthouse, look at the structure, the columns, the raised steps, the archways, the symmetry, the silence. This is not coincidence, it is inheritance. The Basilica, once a Roman public hall, became the model for both church and court. Justice, worship, debate, all follow the Roman blueprint. Step into a university. What do you see? A quad, a hierarchy, a set of robes, titles, rituals. Even knowledge moves through Roman architecture. And then there are the words, etched into marble, chiseled into metal, still in Latin. Senatus Populus Romanus, the Senate and people of Rome, score. You can still find it on buildings in Rome today, but also on coins, flags, seals. It is not a relic, it is a residue. A whisper that says, we never left. In modern capitals, power still builds like the Romans did. It centers itself. It elevates itself. It claims the highest point, the widest view, the largest plaza. It wants symmetry, order, visibility. The same logic that guided the builders of the Forum still guides our governments today. Even our monuments repeat Rome, the arch, the dome, the equestrian statue, the obelisk stolen from elsewhere and planted in the city's heart. The emperor is gone, but the stage remains, and new actors step into the same spotlight. Some cities are built on top of Rome, others are built from its bones, stone repurposed, columns reused, foundations layered like geological memory. A church on top of a temple, a bank on top of a basilica, a subway running beneath an aqueduct. Modernity walks on Roman skin without noticing the pulse beneath. But Rome doesn't need your attention. It doesn't crave worship. It doesn't ask to be remembered. Because it knows you're still using it. Its roads, its spaces, its logic. You follow its rituals without knowing their names. You move through a world whose shape was drawn 2,000 years ago. Even when Rome fell, its cities did not empty. The stones remained, the logic remained, and new powers came to inhabit the old forms. Visigoths, Christians, kings, corporations, all of them stepping into the same grid. Because once a city is carved in Rome's shape, it remembers. And now we call it urban planning, we call it symmetry, we call it classic. But what we're really doing is repeating a pattern first pressed into clay, then into stone, then into empire. Rome may have lost its legions, its emperors may have turned to dust, but its cities never stopped breathing. Because a city is not made of buildings, it's made of intent. And Rome's intent was to last forever. So look again at the streets, the plazas, the arches, the silent logic beneath traffic and glass. What you're seeing is not modernity. It's not progress. It's a ghost with roads, a ghost with form, a ghost called Rome. Languages die, they shift, they fade, they disappear into the mouths of the forgotten. But some don't. Some languages do not die. They divide, they replicate, they embed themselves in the world so deeply that we stop noticing them. Latin is one of those languages. The common story says it's a dead tongue, a relic, a museum piece. But the truth is stranger and more pervasive. Latin never died. It became other languages. It multiplied. Today, when you speak Spanish, you speak Rome. When you speak French, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian, you speak fragments of the same empire, carried across centuries, softened by accent, reshaped by region, but still fundamentally Latin. Even English, a Germanic language on the surface, has been colonized. Over 60% of English vocabulary has Latin roots, especially in law, medicine, theology, and science. Because when power speaks, it still borrows Rome's voice. The church speaks Latin. The courts echo it. Medical terms, Latin. Biology, Latin. Legal systems, filled with phrases that haven't changed in 2,000 years. Habeas corpus, per se, sub pena, de facto, status quo, etc. These aren't affectations, they are rituals. They are incantations left over from the empire. Because Latin was not just a language, it was a tool of structure. It was logical, precise, adaptable. It organized thought the way Rome organized cities. It aligned the world into subjects, verbs, objects, into a structure that mirrored the empire's own hierarchy. To speak Latin was to think like a Roman, and to think like a Roman was to think in systems. That's why it spread, not through beauty, through utility. Rome used Latin to unify its empire. It didn't matter where you were from North Africa, Gaul, Judea, Hispania. Latin became the skeleton of power. It was not a replacement. It was a layer, a code overlaid on top of native speech. And even as the empire fractured, the layer remained. It lived in the church, in the schools, in the monasteries. It became the language of memory, of authority, of the archive. In the Middle Ages, even as spoken tongues evolved, the most important documents were still written in Latin. Charters, laws, treaties, philosophy, sacred texts. Because Latin was how the past was remembered and the future was built. And then came the sciences. When knowledge needed to cross borders, when scholars needed a shared tongue, they returned to Latin. because it was stable, unchanging, universal in a way that no living tongue could be. It became the base language of Western knowledge, the grid upon which thought was arranged. Even now, when we name a new species, when we diagnose a condition, when we write a motto, we reach for Latin because it feels like structure. It feels like law. It feels like Rome. But there's more, because Latin is not just in words. It's in titles, in ranks, in identity. Doctor, professor, magister, senator, imperator. Every role of power still echoes with Roman syllables. Even our names from Caesar to Augustus to Maximus carry prestige not because of meaning, but because of memory. We don't just use Latin, we invoke it. We draw from it when we want to sound eternal, final, untouchable. Think of corporate mottos, state emblems, military units, secret societies. They all reach backward to a language that refuses to vanish. Because Latin commands. It doesn't plead. It doesn't explain. It declares. So no Latin is not dead. It is embedded in stone, in speech, in systems, in us. It is the voice beneath the voice. The shadow tongue that shaped the West, not through poetry, but through structure. And every time you hear a verdict, a motto, a diagnosis, a sermon, listen closely, because the empire still speaks. And Latin is its breath. When the empire cracked, the church emerged, not as a new force, but as a continuation, a transformation, a reshaping of the same will under a different name. In the twilight of Rome, as emperors faded and borders crumbled, another power rose from the ashes. Not military, not civic, but spiritual. Yet it spoke the same language, held the same spaces, carried the same architecture. And in time, the church became Rome. Look at the titles. The Pope was once called Pontifex Maximus, the highest priest of Rome, a title once held by Caesar himself. The bishops ruled over dioceses, the same administrative districts used by imperial governors. The hierarchy of cardinals, bishops, archbishops, a mirror of the senatorial ranks. Even the vestments, robes, mitres, staffs are echoes of imperial authority. This was not coincidence. It was absorption. Rome did not disappear. It was internalized by the church. And the church, in turn, became the new center. When Rome's palaces fell, the basilicas remained, but they no longer held emperors. They held altars and saints and scripture. But the layout didn't change. Long aisles, triumphal arches, domes reaching toward heaven, columns like sentinels of power. Rome was still speaking, but now in the language of the sacred. And the Pope, he was not just a priest. He was a sovereign, a ruler without borders, with diplomats, with gold, with archives, with an army. In time, the Vatican became a state, a sovereign power nested within the ruins of the empire, a kingdom without need of conquest, because it conquered the soul. As kingdoms rose from the broken pieces of the Western Empire, they turned to the church not just for salvation, but for legitimacy. A king was not truly a king until crowned by a pope, because the pope now held what Rome once held: authority. The church inherited the Roman genius for administration, law, ritual, and symbol. Its councils echoed the senates. Its scriptures echoed the codices. Its saints replaced the imperial pantheon. Its rituals replaced the public games, but the logic remained: hierarchy, order, power flowing downward from one center. Christianity began in the shadows as a persecuted cult, but by the 4th century, under Constantine, it became the state religion. The empire did not resist. It embraced the cross. And in doing so, the empire did not die. It reincarnated. Constantine saw the potential. A universal church could unify a fractured world more effectively than any army. He called it Catholic, meaning universal, a Roman idea, reborn in theology. The Eastern Empire Byzantium perfected this merger. Their emperors ruled by divine right. Their priests wore imperial robes. Their churches, like Hagia Sophia, were modeled on the grandeur of the old forums and domes. And in the West, as the old emperor disappeared, the Pope stepped into the vacuum, not as conqueror, but as inheritor. And so, for over 1,000 years, while the empire was said to be gone, the church sat upon its skeleton. And from Rome, still Rome, it ruled the minds and laws of Europe. The Latin language remained. The Roman calendar persisted. The imperial legal system was preserved. Even the very idea of orthodoxy, of doctrinal purity, was Roman in character. The church became the memory of empire and its custodian. Even today, you can walk through St. Peter's Basilica and feel it. The dome, the grandeur, the marble and gold, the Latin inscriptions, the silent echo of Caesar's footsteps, transformed into liturgy. Rome did not fall. It converted. It went from senate to sacristy, from soldier to saint, from emperor to pontiff. And in doing so, it extended its reach far beyond what legions could conquer. It became immortal. So when you look at a cathedral, when you hear Latin in a mass, when a bishop blesses a nation, know that you are witnessing a ritual of empire, disguised, sanctified, but still Roman. The church did not replace Rome. It became its next form. And in robes, not armor, Rome marched on. We think of law as something modern, as something written by parliaments, enforced by judges, argued by lawyers. But law has a ghost, a source, a shape that never really changed. And that shape was forged in Rome. Before Rome, law was oral, local, variable, rooted in tribe and custom. But Rome wrote it down, standardized it, expanded it, made it portable, made it imperial. To rule the empire, Rome needed more than armies. It needed order, predictability, a system of control that reached every province, every citizen, every stranger. And that system was Roman law. It began with the 12 tables, carved in stone, visible to all, immutable. From there, it grew layer by layer, ruling by ruling, case by case. What emerged was not just law. It was infrastructure. Roman law created contracts, property rights, wills, inheritance, corporations, citizenship, civil procedure, legal personhood, not as abstract ideas, but as codified functions. A legal machine that could govern millions, not with swords, but with precedent. And when the Western Empire collapsed, the law didn't vanish. In the East, the Emperor Justinian gathered the full weight of Rome's legal legacy and compiled it. The Corpus Juris Civilis, the body of civil law, a monumental act of preservation, a resurrection of logic. And from that moment on, Roman law became the foundation for every legal system that followed. Today, across Europe, in Latin America, In large parts of Africa and Asia, civil law systems trace directly back to Rome. Even common law, with its own traditions, still draws heavily on Roman concepts. Contracts, torts, citizenship, responsibility, remedy, all shaped by a long-dead empire still whispering through the courts. Every courtroom that upholds the idea of innocent until proven guilty owes its logic to Rome. Every constitution that grants equal rights under the law echoes the Roman vision of civitas, not just a place, but a status. To be Roman was to be a citizen, not just a subject, not just a resident, but someone with legal standing. It was a revolution, and that revolution never ended. The idea that law is above rulers, that written codes bind even kings, that comes from Rome. The idea that law should be reasoned, written, replicable, that too is Roman. Even the words we use in law bear its imprint. Jurisprudence, testament, verdict, court, census, legislation. These are not just terms, they are fossils, markers of a system that never really died. In modern courts, we wear robes, we speak in formality, we cite precedent, we divide crimes into degrees. These rituals are not innovations. They are continuities. Rome still governs through law. When you write a contract, when you register property, when you create a corporation, you are not inventing structure. You are participating in a Roman ritual, a logic so deep, so effective, that even empires that hated Rome used its codes. Even the idea of written law itself, of a system above individuals, binding all, that is a Roman idea. And once that idea takes root, it doesn't go away. The law is where Rome became immortal, because armies fade, temples fall, languages change, but law persists. And Roman law was designed to last. So next time you see a judge in black robes, sitting in silence, reading from written codes, remember, you are not witnessing modernity. You are witnessing the ghost of empire, still rendering judgment, still dividing right from wrong, still issuing decree from a system built 2,000 years ago. Rome no longer rules the land, but it still governs the world. Through law, through order, through code. What do you call a thing that ends in one form but continues in another? A death, a resurrection, or something stranger? Rome did not die. It duplicated. It reappeared in shadows, in symbols, in sovereigns who borrowed its name without its crown. When the Western Empire collapsed, a mirror survived in the East. Byzantium, the so-called Eastern Roman Empire, a name we gave it later. They never called themselves that. To them, they were simply the Romans. From their marble throne in Constantinople, they ruled for 1,000 years, with Roman law, Roman titles, Roman imperial rituals, Greek in language, but Latin in structure. The emperor still wore purple, still ruled by decree, still crowned by God. In Hagia Sophia, the domes rose higher than any Roman temple, and in their archives, Roman codes were guarded like scripture. Byzantium was not a remnant, it was a continuation. And when it finally fell, it passed its fire to others. To Moscow, which declared itself the Third Rome. To the papacy, which claimed to wear the same authority in robes instead of armor. And to the kings of Europe, who craved not just land, but the blessing of Rome's ghost. So, what came next? The Holy Roman Empire. A name that contains a contradiction. It was neither holy nor Roman nor a true empire. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the name. To claim descent from Rome was to claim legitimacy, to wear the eagle, to hold a senate, to mint coins in Latin. Even Charlemagne, when crowned by the Pope, was declared Emperor of the Romans, not of France, not of the Franks, but of the idea. That idea kept echoing. Napoleon crowned himself with a laurel wreath and called himself emperor. He styled his courts, his architecture, his rituals on Rome. Even as he destroyed kings, he copied Caesar's. Because Rome was not gone, it was simply desirable. And across the Atlantic, a new experiment emerged. A republic, with a senate, with a capital, with Latin mottos carved into marble, E pluribus unum, Annuit coeptis, Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new order of the ages. The Roman dream, rewritten in a new key. Washington, D.C. was designed by men obsessed with antiquity. The buildings mirror temples, the plazas echo forums, the language still Latin. The architecture is not homage, it is declaration, a quiet way of saying, we are the next Rome. Rome never needed to return as it was, because the shape of Rome was now embedded in the idea of empire itself. Every power that rose adopted some piece of it. The eagle, the senate, the law, the city as symbol, the dome as heaven on earth. Even fascist Italy looked to Rome not as past, but as fuel. Mussolini paved the Via dei Fori Imperiali to connect his regime to Caesar's ruins. He marched beneath arches, revived Latin slogans, and called it destiny. But it was theater, shadow play on an ancient wall. Because Rome, real Rome, does not belong to one regime. It belongs to pattern. A republic, a monarchy, a dictatorship, a democracy. All can wear the Roman skin, because Rome was not about structure but archetype. To rule the world is to speak as Rome once did, to invoke law, to build cities, to divide and codify. That is the grammar of empire, and it is written in a Roman hand. Today, nations rise and fall, flags change, borders move, but the pattern remains. Because to be Roman is not to be born in a city. It is to believe in the order of power, in the grid, in the center, in the symbol. Rome became shadow, then ghost, then code, and now it runs silently beneath every system that governs us. Not in Latin words, but in the logic those words carried. The empire was reborn, not once, not twice, but endlessly. In kings, in popes, in parliaments, in republics. Rome didn't fall. It replicated. When you turn on your device, an invisible system wakes up. You don't see it, but it runs everything. It sets the rules, defines the limits, controls how inputs become outputs. That's what an operating system is. And Rome was the first operating system of civilization. Not just a city, not just a government, but a way of structuring the world, of arranging reality into hierarchies, functions, permissions, and protocols. And once that system was installed, the world never rebooted. We say Rome fell, but its code kept running. Because Rome didn't just build roads and aqueducts, it built interfaces between ruler and ruled, between citizen and law, between chaos and order, and those interfaces still shape the way we think. A city isn't just buildings, it's a logic, a flow, and the Roman city was a map of control. The forum at the center, the roads radiating out, the temple aligned to the heavens, the basilica anchoring debate, the walls setting the edge. Each part of the city was a module, a function, a node in a wider system. That structure became the template for cities across the world. Paris, London, Washington, Berlin. Not by accident, but by design. Rome taught us how to design centered power. But it didn't stop at architecture. Rome wrote the logic of citizenship, of taxation, of law, of time. Yes, time. 60 minutes, 24 hours, 365 days, leap years. All from Roman calculations, Roman desires to organize the sky as they organize the land. The calendar you use was created by Julius Caesar. The names of the months, still Roman. January, Janus. March, Mars. July, Julius. August, Augustus. Even time was absorbed into the system. The logic of Rome was total. It reached into language, into law, into urban planning, into the imagination. And once embedded, it could not be removed. It worked because it was modular, adaptable, portable. Empires copied it, religions repurposed it, democracies rebranded it. But the kernel remained. The idea that power should be centered, that systems should be layered, that control flows downward, that the world can be organized into clear, ranked units. This logic runs silently beneath modern society. In how we govern, in how we educate, in how we judge, measure, punish, reward. The hierarchy, the grid, the chain of command. These aren't just convenient, they're Roman. Even digital systems follow Roman patterns. A database is a grid. A forum is a space of debate. A user account is a form of citizenship, terms and conditions contracts. The language of the internet is new, but the structure? Old. And perhaps most Roman of all is the idea of the state, the abstraction of power into something larger than any one person, the creation of an entity that can own, judge, tax, wage war. That idea was made real in Rome, and we still live inside it. We did not invent our systems. We inherited them. From senators in togas, from scribes at stone tablets, from emperors whispering orders down marble corridors. Rome gave us the framework, the syntax, the schema, and like an operating system, it persists across versions. Monarchy, republic, empire, democracy, corporation. The UI changes, but the OS runs beneath. Rome is no longer seen because it became structure. It became the invisible logic of civilization. It no longer needs statues. It no longer needs legions. It only needs memory and repetition. And every time we build a city, a court, a code of conduct, we run it again. Not because we choose Rome, but because we can't imagine anything else. We have searched for Rome in ruins, in books, in legends, carved into broken stone. We have looked for it in fallen walls, in ancient coins, in the echo of Latin prayers. But perhaps we have looked in the wrong direction, because Rome is not outside us anymore. It's within, not in the stones, but in the shape of thought. When you say the word empire, what do you see? Columns, Marble, legions in formation, a man in a laurel crown. You are not imagining China or Babylon or Persia. You are imagining Rome, even when you don't mean to. Rome has become the default myth of what power looks like, of what civilization is. Not because we remember it, but because we were raised inside its memory, its values, its rhythms, its silhouettes. We measure greatness by its scale, its order, its conquest, its architecture. All Roman metrics. Even the term civilized comes from civitas, the Roman idea of city and citizen as one. Ask yourself, what does a real government look like? A senate, a flag, a capital, a body of law, a head of state. That's not invention, that's inheritance. We still talk like Romans. We still believe deeply in their hierarchy of order. We still speak in their categories: civil versus savage, legal versus criminal, citizen versus foreigner. We divide the world as they did. We organize the unknown with imperial logic. Even our language of ambition is Roman. We speak of building empires, of expanding influence, of conquering markets. We describe success as dominion, not happiness, not harmony, but reach and scale and power. That is the Roman ghost in our mouths. Even in rebellion, we echo Rome. Our revolutions build republics with senates and assemblies. Our rebellions claim legitimacy through documents and codes. Even when we rise against order, we speak its language, because it lives in us. Rome became a psychic structure, a myth that programs behavior. It rewards hierarchy. It reveres law. It sanctifies expansion. And those beliefs live deep beneath the surface of our systems, our cultures, our dreams. We tell ourselves Rome is gone, but we mark our maps with its logic. We plan our cities with its symmetry. We write our laws in its tone. We dream an empire, and when we look forward to the future, we still imagine it in Roman terms. Capitals on Mars, governors of planets, federations, galactic senates. Even science fiction cannot escape its gravity. We do not imagine new worlds. We imagine new Romes. Why? Because Rome was not just a place, it was a story. And the story was written so deeply into the structure of civilization that we don't know how to erase it. We don't even want to. Because deep down, Rome gave us something we still crave. Form, a center, a code, a shared rhythm of order. Even if it came with conquest and cruelty and chains, it also gave shape to the chaos. So Rome did not fall. It was never meant to. Because what Rome truly was not the city, not the empire, but the idea that the world can be organized, that humanity can be ruled by design. And that idea still lives in our cities, in our systems, in our rituals, in our minds. Rome is no longer a memory, it is a mirror. And when we look at the world, when we look at ourselves, we see its reflection. Still there, still running, still whispering. We never left, because Rome never fell.